Imagine waking up to a country where nothing works. No traffic lights, no payment systems, no government websites, no emergency services online. Just silence where the hum of the digital world used to be. What would it take for one person to bring an entire nation to its knees before sunrise? In May 2007, the small Baltic nation of Estonia became the first country in history to face a coordinated cyber siege that paralyzed its digital infrastructure. For 3 weeks, waves of distributed denial-of-service attacks bombarded government ministries, banks, media outlets, and telecommunications networks. Estonia, one of the most digitally advanced societies on Earth, suddenly found itself cut off from the systems it relied on for daily survival. This wasn't just a technical glitch or a random act of vandalism. It was the opening chapter of modern cyber warfare, a blueprint that nation-states would study and replicate for decades to come. The attacks exposed how fragile our connected world really is, and how a few lines of code could do what armies once needed tanks and bombs to accomplish. The trigger was a statue. On April 26, 2007, the Estonian government decided to relocate the Bronze Soldier, a Soviet-era war memorial, from central Tallinn to a military cemetery on the outskirts. For many Estonians, it was a relic of occupation. For Estonia's Russian-speaking minority and for Moscow, it was sacred ground honoring the defeat of Nazi Germany. Protests erupted immediately. Street clashes turned violent. 1 person died. Hundreds were arrested. Russian officials condemned the move in harsh language. Then, on April 27th, something unprecedented began. Estonian government websites started collapsing under the weight of millions of requests flooding their servers simultaneously. These weren't ordinary visitor spikes. They were coordinated distributed denial-of-service attacks, or DDoS attacks, weaponizing thousands of hijacked computers around the world to overwhelm Estonian targets with meaningless traffic. Within hours, the websites of the Estonian parliament, the president's office, and multiple ministries went dark. The attacks escalated rapidly. On April 30th, Estonia's largest banks, Hansabank and SEB Eesti US Bank, were knocked offline. Estonians couldn't access their accounts, withdraw money, or make payments. In a country where over 90% of banking transactions happened online, this was economic paralysis. The assault came in waves. Attackers would probe for weaknesses, then concentrate overwhelming force on specific targets. They used botnets, networks of infected computers controlled remotely without their owners' knowledge. At the peak, some attacks reached 90 megabits per second of malicious traffic. For 2007, that was staggering firepower. Estonia's small team of cybersecurity experts worked around the clock. They blocked millions of IP addresses. They filtered traffic. They took entire services offline to protect core infrastructure. The Reform Party's website stayed down for over a week. Major newspapers couldn't publish online. Even internet service providers began filtering traffic from abroad to keep domestic networks functioning. By mid-May, the most intense assaults had subsided, but sporadic attacks continued for weeks. Estonia had survived, but barely. The country's reputation as an e-government pioneer had been tested by fire, and the entire world was watching. Tracing a DDoS attack to its true source is notoriously difficult. The attacks on Estonia originated from IP addresses in dozens of countries. Many came from hijacked computers whose owners had no idea they were being used as weapons. But patterns emerged. Forensic analysis showed that much of the attack traffic came from Russia and former Soviet states. Instructions on how to join the attacks appeared on Russian-language forums. Some included target lists and scheduling for coordinated strikes. These weren't hidden on the dark web. They were posted openly, treated like a form of patriotic activism. One user, who called himself the Commissar, was particularly active. Security researchers traced posts organizing attacks and distributing attack tools. A 20-year-old ethnic Russian living in Estonia named Dmitry Galushkevich was later convicted in Estonian court of participating in the attacks against the Reform Party website. He received a fine of 17,000 kroons, roughly 1,000 euros. But Galushkevich was a foot soldier, not a general. The scale and sophistication of the attacks suggested coordination beyond amateur hacktivists. Estonian officials and several Western cybersecurity experts pointed toward Russian state involvement or at minimum state tolerance of the attacks. Russia denied any involvement. A Kremlin spokesperson called the accusations unfounded and politically motivated. No evidence has been declassified that definitively proves orders came from Russian intelligence or military agencies. Technical attribution in cyberspace remains murky by design. What is documented beyond dispute is the impact. Parliamentary websites down for days. Banks offline during business hours. 6 weeks of sustained digital siege. And a clear political context that made the timing impossible to ignore. Not everyone agreed on what happened or why. Some Russian analysts argued the attacks were spontaneous expressions of public anger, not government operations. They pointed to the genuine outrage over the statue's removal and the visible protests as evidence of grassroots motivation. Some cybersecurity researchers emphasized that DDoS attacks, while disruptive, are relatively unsophisticated. Teenagers with access to the right tools can launch them. The question was whether this particular campaign's scale and coordination required state resources or just a large, angry community with technical skills. Western intelligence agencies were cautious in their public statements. While they acknowledged the circumstantial evidence pointing toward Russia, they stopped short of formal attribution. The legal and diplomatic frameworks for responding to cyberattacks didn't exist yet in 2007. No one wanted to escalate based on incomplete evidence. There were also debates about Estonia's own vulnerability. Critics noted that the country's rush to digitize everything created single points of failure. If your whole government runs online and you don't have sufficient defenses, you've built a glass house in a dangerous neighborhood. Estonian officials countered that their digital infrastructure, despite the attacks, proved resilient enough to recover without permanent damage. For 3 weeks, ordinary Estonians lived in a state of uncertainty and frustration. People who relied on online banking to pay bills found themselves locked out of their accounts. Small businesses couldn't process card payments. Journalists couldn't update news sites as events unfolded. One bank employee later described working 72-hour shifts trying to keep systems running, sleeping under desks, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. IT teams at government ministries manually filtered millions of connection attempts, knowing that one wrong move could take down services that citizens genuinely needed. There was no loss of life. No physical infrastructure was destroyed, but there was a collective realization of vulnerability. When your pension payment doesn't arrive because servers are down, when you can't check the news during a national crisis, when the government can't communicate with its own people, the psychological impact cuts deep. Estonia's population is only 1.3 million. In a country that small, everyone knew someone affected. The attacks also deepened ethnic tensions. Some Russian-speaking Estonians felt blamed collectively for the actions of hackers they had nothing to do with. Estonian nationalists saw their fears of Russian interference validated. A cybersecurity incident became another thread in a much older and more painful historical tapestry. Think of the internet like a highway system. A DDoS attack is like organized groups blocking every entrance ramp at once with thousands of cars. The road still exists, but legitimate traffic can't get through. Estonia in 2007 showed that you don't need to blow up the highway. You just need to create an artificial traffic jam. This was the first time a nation-state faced a sustained cyber offensive targeting its core functions. It changed how governments thought about security. NATO began treating cyber attacks as potential Article 5 issues, acts of war that could trigger collective defense obligations. The Estonian experience directly led to the creation of NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn, which now produces the Tallinn Manual, the most comprehensive guide to international law in cyberspace. The attacks also revealed the asymmetry of cyber conflict. Estonia's attackers, whoever they were, didn't need bombers or missiles. They needed time, bandwidth, and a sufficient number of compromised computers. The cost-benefit ratio was staggering. For relatively little investment, they generated international headlines and real political pressure. Legal experts still debate whether the 2007 attacks constituted an act of war. They disrupted critical infrastructure but caused no permanent damage. They were politically motivated but technically simple. They crossed a line that hadn't been clearly drawn yet. That ambiguity is itself a weapon. When your opponent doesn't know where your red lines are, they're more likely to test them. Here's what we know for certain. Estonia was hit by massive coordinated DDoS attacks in April and May 2007. The attacks disrupted government, financial, and media infrastructure for weeks. They followed a politically charged event and were discussed openly on Russian-language forums. One low-level participant was convicted. No state actor has been proven responsible in any court or through declassified intelligence. What remains uncertain is the degree of state involvement, the full extent of who organized the attacks, and whether similar capabilities have been prepared against other targets since then. What happened next shaped the digital battlefield we live on today. The lessons from Estonia 2007 spread quickly. Countries around the world began hardening their cyber defenses and studying offensive capabilities. Russia has been accused of launching similar attacks against Georgia in 2008 during their military conflict, and against Ukraine repeatedly since 2014. The playbook established in Tallinn has been refined and expanded. For Estonia itself, the attacks became a point of national resilience. The country invested heavily in cybersecurity, becoming a global leader in digital defense and governance. The NATO Cyber Center in Tallinn now trains personnel from dozens of nations. Estonia's X-Road platform, which securely connects government databases, is studied worldwide as a model. The broader question remains unanswered. As critical infrastructure from power grids to hospitals to transportation systems becomes more connected, the attack surface grows. What worked against Estonia with 2007 technology would work even better today against less prepared targets. The weapons get stronger while the targets become more valuable. Cyber warfare doesn't have Geneva Conventions yet. The rules are still being written, tested, and broken. Attribution is hard. Retaliation is complicated. Deterrence is uncertain. Every nation with internet connectivity is both a potential target and a potential launchpad for attacks. The invisible battlefield is everywhere. One statue's removal became the spark that lit the first modern cyber war. What seemed like a one-night hack job turned into a 3-week siege that changed how the world thinks about digital security. The hacker who took down Estonia wasn't a single person. It was a distributed swarm motivated by politics, enabled by technology, and protected by the fog of cyberspace. If you want to understand how cyber warfare evolved from this first shot, watch our documentary on Russia's attacks against Ukraine's power grid. The tactics that started in Tallinn got deadlier when they moved from websites to generators.